Mornings in his apartment always began the same way. A narrow beam of light rested against the aluminum frame, bumped into a bottle of water on the windowsill, and splashed onto the wall with a matte glare. The coffee maker coughed, like an old man about to speak, and spat out a dark stream into a cup with a chipped edge. Neatly washed but unironed shirts lay on the table, a layered pie of gray-blue graphite. And silence, the same silence from which neither an argument, nor a joke, nor a good morning are born. I got up earlier, even though I no longer had to go to work. My alarm clock rang reluctantly, as if out of politeness, and I still woke up before it, out of habit and inner anxiety. The kitchen smelled of grain and something eternally unsaid. I put his cup to the right of his plate. He drinks from his right so that he can scroll through the news on his phone with his free left hand. He nodded. I smiled. He did too, but his gaze remained on the screen. How did you sleep? I asked. It's fine, he answered without raising his eyes. You. Same. And the pause is too long for people who have been together for a long time, and too short for people who love each other. We were never a couple who spewed out, I love you, in every text message. The words were like they were stored for a rainy day so as not to waste them. The first I love you came in the second year, like an awkward toast at a party where no one was sure why we had gathered at all. I remember how we stood at the bus stop, wet snow, streetlights splashed with light, my mittens with crumbs of salt from the road stuck to them. He came closer to me, not hugging, but just standing a little closer, as if blocking the wind. I love you, he said evenly, as the train schedule says I answered the same. And for some reason, I immediately felt that now I had to live up to some new role that none of us had rehearsed. 9 years later, I stayed with him. Not we moved in together, not we're settling in, but it's convenient for you to get from here to your project. Stay with me if you want. The word stay was like a folding chair, useful but not a home. I brought some of my things in transparent boxes, sweaters, books with dog-eared corners, jars of creams that smelled like orange peel. I put my mugs on the top shelf, cleared out the bottom drawer for socks, and all the time I caught myself wanting to ask, listen, is this for long? Or am I a guest on an extended visit? He was not a bad person. He never raised his voice, never slammed the door, never left at night without warning. His reserve seemed like a virtue, until I noticed how easily any manifestation of warmth was drowned in this reserve. He could text me at lunch, "How was your day?" and disappear for 8 hours, and in the evening he would put a plate on the table exactly 20 centimeters from the edge, he always does this, and ask, "Would you like some salt?" This is more logistics than care. Logistics is a great substitute for feelings. Everything is on time. Everything is in its place. Everything is as it should be. On the day I was laid off, I came home early and stood for a long time in the stuffy hallway, listening to water dripping from the filter into a bowl. Any system sometimes breaks valves. The company's valves broke on the budget. Mine, on my throat. I put a box of things on the floor, a figurine from my desk, a notebook in which I had never written anything important, because important things are usually put off, like conversations that we put off for years. He came in the evening. He took off his jacket, hung it neatly on a hanger, adjusted the sleeve, as if the sleeve was the main problem. I said, "I was laid off." He nodded. "It's a pity," he said, and for a second something flickered in his face. Maybe anxiety, maybe a desire to be useful. I waited inside me. One phrase was spinning like a broken fan. Tell me that we are a team. Tell me that I am not alone. He looked at his watch and added, "So now it will be easier for you with the schedule." And a couple of days later, as if by chance, between, "Do you want white or dark bread?" and "Please turn off the light in the bathroom, it's too bright," he said that he feels irritated when he comes home from work, and I am home all day and can do whatever I want. He then added that he had chosen an unfortunate word. What he meant was not irritation, but like a mismatch of efforts, a complex phrase in which I still heard a simple thing. He sees me, with my loss, my fear, my confusion, as a person who can do whatever he wants. Invisibility, I guess, is what it sounds like. In the evenings, we watch TV series at different ends of the sofa. Between us is an open blanket like a border. Sometimes our feet meet in the middle, and he automatically moves away. not because he finds it unpleasant, but because it's more familiar. I laugh in the right places, he does the same a second later, and I, a second later, think, what if we lived like neighbors, would it be different? Sometimes I imagine our relationship as an airport at night. Rare lights, long empty corridors, and no flight announcements. People stay on the benches, dozing, hoping to be called somewhere. But nothing is announced to us. We just sit at our gate and remain silent. One of our rare joint grocery shopping trips turned out to be like a tour of a museum of everyday life. He walked quickly. I was catching up. The basket creaked like a wheel. At the shelf with bleach, he asked, "Did you spill something on the stove? Need to wash it off." I wanted to say, "Can I sometimes reach out to you not with a rag, but with a hug?" But I said, "Let's take something softer. My skin is dry." He shrugged. His shoulders are a whole separate language. Yours is yours. Mine is mine. At the checkout, the cashier said, "Do you need a bag?" He answered for us, "One." We stuffed things into a common bag like strangers in a hostel who accidentally bought the same muesli. I still have a conversation on my phone where I ask, "Do you find me attractive at all?" He replied, "Yes, otherwise I wouldn't be with you." That was the first time I noticed how the word otherwise can sound like a lock. Not, "I love you because you are you," but I am rationally happy with the parameters. I wanted to become an Excel spreadsheet to make it easier for him. One Friday he was late. I was making soup, not because he likes it, but because he eats it. Carrots were boiling on the stove, and my back was reflected in the window, straight, almost alien. His phone rang. He hung it up from the hallway, then called back, turning on speakerphone while untying his shoelaces. A man's voice asked, "Who are you with this weekend?" "With your girlfriend." "Yes, I'm alone," he answered a little tiredly. "I have a girlfriend living with me now. Well, how—" He hesitated, and I felt how the noise of the soup became too loud. "She's just staying with me, as long as it's convenient for her." I held the spoon by the handle like a small shovel, and for some reason I thought that if I let go, it would sink. He walked into the kitchen and finally noticed me. For a second, his face twisted. Not guilt, no. An attempt to find the right words. He always chooses words like keys. Many options, but none that turn in the lock. "Did you hear?" he asked quietly. I probably said it wrong. Probably said wrong thoughts beat against the bones of the skull, like a bird against glass. I inhaled the steam from the soup and suddenly clearly saw all these years. From the first, "I love you" at the bus stop to today's "I'm alone," I realized that I was sitting in someone else's life on a folding chair, and for my 9 years they paid not for a house, but for a place by the wall. "It's okay," I said, and for the first time I heard how smoothly I could tell a lie. He nodded, relieved that there would be no scene. We don't know how to do scenes, we know how to do silence. He went into the room, and I continued stirring the soup, circulation as an illusion of movement. I didn't sleep at night. The shadow of the chandelier hung from the ceiling like a compass with its needle cut off. He was breathing regularly next to me, like a metronome in a solfeggio class, and this breathing suddenly became irritating, not because it was noisy, but because it was always the same. I thought about the suitcase in the closet, about the transparent boxes in which my things looked like a museum of exhibits. The life of a woman in waiting. I thought about how my desire not to quarrel had turned into a refusal to live. In the morning, I took out my notebook, the same one from work, where I hadn't written anything important. On the first page, in neat handwriting, I wrote, "What is home to me?" Short lines began to appear under this list. The smell of coffee that was brewed for me, the word "we" that I'm not ashamed to say, a hand touching mine not on schedule. I reached the fifth line and stopped. Readiness to choose me out loud. I put a period and immediately erased it. I want to believe that if you don't put a period, it's not the final one. At that moment, the phone on the table vibrated, a message from him. "How are you? How was the night?" I answered, "Fine." He, "Okay." And a minute later, "By the way, don't forget to buy some bleach. It's all gone." I put the phone face down and the white light from the window fell on the notebook. A clear, decree-like thought popped into my head. I've been living like a neighbor for too long, and if I don't say my otherwise, silence will do it for me. I closed the notebook, pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail, and not quite understanding how exactly this would happen, I heard my own voice inside. Tonight I'll ask him to call a spade, and if he can't, I didn't have time to finish my thought. The lock clicked in the door. He returned for the forgotten key to the box in the parking lot. He walked into the corridor, stopped and looked at me the way you look at familiar furniture that suddenly turned out of place. "Why are you dressed so early?" he asked. I glanced at the suitcase by the wall. I hadn't noticed how I had taken it out of the closet. He looked there too and raised his eyebrows. "Are you going somewhere?" I took a deep breath. My ears started ringing. It seemed like the needle on the compass that wasn't there had moved after all. "Are you going somewhere?" He looked at the suitcase again, as if it were an interior item that suddenly turned out to be alive. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I have a lot of thoughts today. Let's talk in the evening?" He nodded like a man with a free slot in his calendar. He put the bunch of keys on the dresser, found the right one, tossed it into his palms, and smiled politely. The same smile you give your neighbor in the elevator. "Tonight, so be it," he said. "I'll just stop by the store. I need to get some bleach." The door closed softly, like putting a dot with a pencil, so that you can erase it if you want. I was left with a suitcase and silence. The silence was thick as milk and smelled of that, while it's convenient for her. I put the suitcase back against the wall, as if I had returned the animal to its cage, and went into the kitchen. I opened the window. Humid air rose from the street, strange voices, the rustle of tires on wet asphalt, the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe. I threw on my jacket and went out to where people effortlessly pronounce "we." In the cafe, I took a small table by the window, which reflected my back and the suitcase that was no longer nearby. The barista smiled, asked my name, and wrote it on the glass. Anya. I always liked how strangers pronounce my name a little softer than their own. I took out my notebook, the one where I had written "readiness to choose me out loud in the morning," and wrote another line. "And not be embarrassed about this choice in front of others." The phone vibrated. Dasha. She has long been able to hear the pauses between my words. "Where are you?" she asked. "In a cafe near my house." I answered. Pulling myself together, I told him briefly about the suitcase, about "I'm alone," about the bleach that creeps into every conversation we have like an obligatory ingredient. Dasha sighed. "Do you know what's the worst thing about a relationship like this?" she said. "You learn to do without yourself. At first it seems like strength, but then you realize that it's a disappearance." "I'm afraid of being unfair," I said. "He's not bad. He's just not different." "This isn't a trial, Anya," she said quietly. "There's no such thing as bad good. There's suits me doesn't suit me." If you've been living like a neighbor for many years, it's not a death sentence for him. It's a diagnosis of your life next to him. We were silent. In the pause, you could hear the barista tapping his horn on the metal bar, knocking out the used coffee, a sound like a habit. 1, 2, 3. "What do you want?" Dasha asked. "To be chosen, not implied," I said, surprised at how easy it sounded, "and to choose in response." "Then tell him this. Not in hints, not on a notepad. Say it out loud like at the checkout. 'I need a bag.' Yes." And see if he can answer without "probably we said goodbye." I finished my coffee and the cardboard cup rustled in my palm like a paper airplane that you launch into class, not knowing whether it will reach the window. On the way home, I walked slowly, through puddles, through leaves, through my own thoughts. The janitor pulled a wet broom, leaving a clean strip on the asphalt. I suddenly wanted the same strip in a conversation, transparent without a coating. In the evening, he came with a bag, and of course with bleach. He placed it on the table carefully, parallel to the edge, as if he was taking aim. "I didn't have time to grab dinner. Maybe we should cook something," he said casually. "Let's talk first," I said. We sat down opposite each other. On the table between us lay two things, his bunch of keys and my notebook. The keys jingled, not loudly, but enough to remind me. Every door has its own habit of closing. I opened the notebook and read aloud, not like a prosecutor reading an indictment, but like a person who is finally learning to pronounce his wishes. It hurts me to live in the stay as long as it's convenient mode. I'm not the mistress of your kitchen. I'm the person who chose you, and I want you to choose me too, out loud so that we could be us, not neighbors on the shopping list. I'm tired of understanding you from half words and building a life from half gestures. I need a home where I'm touched unscheduled. If that's impossible, I'll leave, not out of revenge, out of self-care. He listened. His face was focused, like a man trying to catch a train and checking whether he is on the right track. He nodded several times, mechanically, rarely looking up. I hear you, he said finally. And I don't like that you feel that way. But Anya, well, it's not that bad. We don't argue. We have stability. I'm always there. I help with things. Isn't that enough? We're adults. Yes, I answered. But no. He frowned. You see, he began slowly. Not in these expressions. I don't know how to choose out loud in all this. In our family, it's different. My father loved my mother, but he never said so. He fixed the sockets regularly. This is also love. Fixing electrical outlets is important, I said, but electrical outlets don't help when the house is empty. I can try, he said, and it almost sounded like a promise. I can ask how you're doing more often. Write more than one word during lunch. Let's make a plan? He hesitated and added, well, agree that we'll have 2 joint activities a week. I can set reminders. I really want you to be happy. The word plan quietly echoed in my chest with a metallic clang, as if our hugs could be put on the calendar between go to the MFC and wash the stove. I'm not against plans, I said, but I don't need a schedule. I need a feeling readiness to choose and name, and also a conversation with a person who is not embarrassed to say, this is my girl, this is my person. After all, on Friday you said, I'm alone. He blushed, just a little, barely noticeably. I didn't want to hurt you. It was just easier to explain. Well, what difference does it make to any of the guys? But it does to me, I said, because it was as if I wasn't there at that moment. We fell silent again. I heard someone turn on the water somewhere in the house, the front door slamming on its spring. He looked at the keys, then at me. I'll think about it, he said, quietly. I'm not against a therapy if that's important to you, but I don't want us to be made into something we're not. I'm not a guy from the movies. I don't need a guy from the movies, I replied. I need you, but with a choice. He nodded as if he had accepted the task for consideration. He stood up and went to take a shower. I sat looking at his bunch of keys. On one of the metal tags was engraved the name of his parking bay. On the other were our initials, which we had once knocked out as a joke at a fair, a +C. I ran my finger over them. The metal was warm, like a word that had been kept in a pocket for too long. The phone lit up on the table, letter from the former boss. Anya, hi. A short-term contract for 3 months has appeared. We need someone who can handle processes. You are ideal start. On Monday, the office is on the other side of town, but you can work remotely part of the time. If you are interested, let me know by tomorrow at 12 o'clock. I reread it twice. Something clicked inside, not like a lock, but like a switch. The room became a shade brighter. This was an offer not only about work, this was an offer to get out of the basement air while it's convenient. At that moment, he came back from the shower, drying his hair with a towel. He looked at me, at the notebook, at the letter that I had not managed to hide, and at the suitcase by the wall. Listen, he paused. If you do leave, will you leave the key in my mailbox or give it to me personally? I looked up. The pause stretched out like a thread that could be broken with one movement. Until tomorrow 12 o'clock, was flashing on the phone screen. So are you staying or not? He asked, and for the first time in a long time he looked straight ahead without leaving. I inhaled, feeling a quiet, dense wave of decision building beneath my ribs, and I realized my next answer would change the architecture of our shared silence. So are you staying or not? He asked, and for the first time in a long time there was no polite buffer in his voice. Today I'll say yes to work, I replied. And I'll tell you tonight, honestly, the word work turned out to be a life preserver. I wrote yes to my former boss, and while the circle was flying towards me, I felt how the water under my feet stopped being a quagmire for a second. He nodded, as if I had marked an item in the general table, contract confirmed, and left, taking his key to the box from the dresser. Left alone, I ran my hand over the suitcase and felt the fabric was warm from my decision. Then I hid it in the closet, like a spring that could be taken out again. The apartment was so quiet that you could hear the drops in the siphon flowing through the loop. I sat down by the window and looked down for a long time. A man in a green jacket was walking his dog, a barista was carrying out a gray bag of waste, a girl in a red hat was laughing into the phone. All these people did not live comfortably for now, but simply they lived. I caught myself on an almost childish envious, how did they do it? And smiled. Maybe they just say it out loud. The I'm First day of the contract began on Friday early. I went out at dusk. The cool air stroked my cheeks with a palm that had not yet had time to become cold. The light in the tram was amber. People were dozing, trembling in time with the rails. I, as I had not done for a long time, listened to my body. How my shoulders grew heavy under the strap of my bag, how my stomach responded to anxiety, how my fingers trembled from coffee. At the transfer, I bought a Viennese bun. Let it be warm in my hands and not just in my thoughts. At the stop, they pushed me. I said sorry, and suddenly heard in response, "Nothing, it happens." And this simple recognition of my existence warmed me. The office greeted me with the smell of cleaning products and rubber mats. Banal, but real. I was shown around the floor, shown a desk, a coffee machine, nameplates on the doors. My nameplate just had a number for now. The girl from HR, Katya, smiled. "Anna, are you with us for 3 months? Let's see if we like each other." If we like each other? How long has it been since I heard someone calmly talk about choosing as a process and not about powers? At lunch, colleagues were discussing which filter each person puts on their photos. They asked me how to get there. I answered, and they listened to me, not nodding for the sake of nodding, but with interest. A small, absurd gratitude for every and you, uttered not for the sake of it, but with curiosity. At the end of the day, Katya stopped me at the elevator. "This color suits you." And she poked her finger at my sweater. I burst out laughing, too loudly as if from an unexpected slap in the face of pleasantness. It's been a long time since anyone told me that it suits me without otherwise I wouldn't be with you. The road back was already different. The city lit up, and in the reflection of the tram window, I saw a woman in whom confidence was evident. Not loud, not harsh, but the kind that makes the mug in your hand stop shaking. I came home before him and put the remaining soup on plates. After all, we have stability. I put a notebook on the table and a pen next to it, not like a weapon, like a cane. When he entered, the hallway smelled of wet mittens and the plastic of a plastic bag. He took off his shoes, put the bleach in its usual place, and held his fingers on its neck for a second, as if searching for answers in it. "Well?" He sat down opposite and put the keys on the table. "Did you say yes?" "Yes," I nodded. "I'm going to the contract. It's far, it's inconvenient, but I want to, okay." He nodded again. "I'm proud." He said it evenly, without any obvious warmth, but I decided to at least try. I opened the notebook, and we returned to us. I repeated that I needed a choice out loud, we, without quotation marks, a presence that does not consist of sockets and schedules. He listened diligently, even too diligently. Then he coughed and said, "I made a plan," and handed me a sheet of paper printed from notes. On it was, Monday, dinner together, Wednesday, walk, Saturday, cinema, daily, 2 unrelated messages at lunch, weekly, the question, "How are you?" I looked at this sheet and thought that in front of me was his love in a foreign language. He doesn't know how to pronounce it, so he translates it in a dictionary. "Let's try," I said. "But you understand that this is not everything?" "Yes." He clasped his fingers together. "I understand. I will try to speak and imagine you correctly." We started. On Monday he cooked dinner, he oversalted it. I read that the recipe requires a pinch of salt. he justified himself, and looked as if he was afraid of getting a bad grade. I laughed and suggested that we finish it together to taste. On Wednesday, we walked along the embankment. The wind from the river caught my hair on my collar. He touched my palm several times, as if checking that it would not create static electricity. These touches were like a simulator. The mechanics were present, endurance appeared, but the feeling was 2 kilometers behind. On Friday, he took me to his friend Igor's birthday party. On the way, I asked, "Please introduce me as your girlfriend. Not as she lives with me, not as we've known each other for a long time. Just my girlfriend." He nodded, and I heard in the nod like an empty bottle rolling on the floor. "Yes, yes, we'll do it." Igor's apartment greeted us with the smell of pizza and oranges, laughter spilling out of the kitchen into the hallway. We were greeted with cries of, "Oh, finally!" Igor hugged him, shook my hand. And then that moment came, tiny but huge for me. "This is Anya," he said, and stopped mid-sentence, as if he was crossing a puddle and was not sure of the depth. "We have been together for a long time." The word "together" forced its way out like a cat whose door was open narrowly. "A girl?" Igor clarified, laughing. "Yes." He nodded too quickly. "Yes, my girlfriend." It was as if the sun had touched me. I smiled, banal and happy, like people on postcards. But then there was a feast, the promised warmth, and on the third toast, a new interlocutor, Sergei, asked him, "So do you live alone now, or what?" and winked in my direction, as if we all understand that women are what? "Well, I have now." He began, "She is staying with me, to live as long as it is convenient for her." A paper napkin fell out of my hand in a lump. I looked up. He had already noticed what he had said and guiltily pressed his lips together. "I expressed myself incorrectly," he muttered. "Habit. Habits are what we repeat," I said quietly. He nodded like a student caught on autopilot. I went out onto the balcony to breathe. It smelled of iron and snow. From the kitchen came laughter, and someone was loudly telling how he vacuumed at night, so as not to think I stood and thought that people invent monsters from dust, so as not to notice the desert of silence. He came out to me, closed the door behind him so that the cold would not come in, and looked at me as if there was ink on my cheek. "Forgive me," he said. In moments when I need to be quick, I choose old phrases. "This is not about you, this is about me." "And living with you is about me," I answered. We returned to the room, sat until the cake. He was attentive, pouring me tea and covering my shoulders with a blanket, like a waiter in a good restaurant who remembers everything but does not sit at the table. We walked home in silence. He stopped at the entrance. "I'll sign up for a psychologist," he said. "And if you want, a family psychologist too." "I want this to work out." "I want it too," I said. "But I don't want any price. I want your truth." "If your truth is that it's easier for you to live alone, tell me. I won't fix you." The next day, I met Dasha and told her about my girlfriend and about staying to live. She smiled reproachfully. "You know, it's like, he picked me up but couldn't carry me, but at least he picks me up." "I see that he's trying," I admitted, "but sometimes his efforts are like a questionnaire, filled out correctly but not about the living me." "Then set a deadline," Dasha said. "Not an ultimatum, but a deadline for yourself. And at the same time, look for a place to live. Not to blackmail, but to know that you can get out." We opened the laptop and found an ad. A small studio on the top floor, a window overlooking a courtyard with an apple tree. The owners, no children or animals, but respectful of other people's lives. The house is old, the ceilings are high, the walls are cracked, like an old album where every crack is a story. On Sunday, I had a meeting with the owner. The studio smelled of worn-out wood varnish and apple peels on the windowsill. The owner, a skinny woman in a blue sweater, spoke softly and a little melodiously. "A music teacher lived here before you. She pasted the wallpaper herself. If you move in, we'll change it. I can give you the keys in a week. The deposit is small." I walked around the room and imagined my transparent boxes here, not as proof of temporariness, but as a beginning. I imagined how I put my mug not on the top shelf, but where it was convenient for me. How in the morning the light doesn't rest against someone else's aluminum frame, but falls on my books. I'll take it, I said, and felt another gear click into place inside. Returning home, I bought some pies downstairs from my grandmother, so that I could come not only with decisions, but also with something warm. Climbing the stairs, I thought about how we would talk, how I would say, "We have a month. During this month, it's either us or we honestly break up. I won't persuade you to love me, but I won't wait either." And I also thought, if he chooses, I'll cancel the studio. If he doesn't choose, I have a door key that will turn the lock evenly. He was home earlier, a rarity. The kitchen was softly lit, there were 2 plates on the table, the dish was covered with a lid, and on the stem of the glass hung a paper tag, which is sometimes hung in cafes. Reserved. He made a reservation for our dinner. I felt strangely funny and scared at the same time. "You're early," he said. "I wanted—" He hesitated, found a word. "To surprise." "I'll like any of your wanted," I answered, taking off my scarf. I noticed little things that weren't there before. Next to my toothbrush, a second new one, in a holder with the words "We" printed on a printer and cut out with scissors along a curve. On the front shelf, a key box with 2 slots, one with Anya written in marker, the other with Seryoja. In the hallway, a small rug for my shoes. These gestures look like hints in a textbook for those who are just mastering the language of care. They were clumsy, but my eyes stung treacherously. And yet I knew, this is not enough if inside are old words. "I made an appointment with a psychologist," he said, as if reporting, "on Monday, and also—" He put an envelope on the table. "This is a rental agreement for a parking space. I rewrote it so that we have common access. You can also come and park your car if you take—" He fell silent. "I realize that it's important that you have an equal opportunity." I smiled, the habit of logistics again winning over the language of the heart, but I did it sincerely. "Thank you," I said, "but let's talk about us." We sat down. I told him about the studio. Where, how much it cost, how it smelled like apple trees. I said that we had a month. He listened and didn't object, and that scared me no less than the refusal. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly, "but I want you to be happy if you'll be better off there." He spread his hands. "I want to be happy with you," I interrupted, "but not at any cost." We talked until late, ate his surprise, vegetarian lasagna, accidentally without salt. Drank tea, he tried to touch, I didn't pull my hand away. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted something to grow out of this warmth, not by schedule. He showed the calendar on his phone. Joint activity, joint walk, call mom, introduce Anya. "Here," he said, "on Sunday lunch with parents, I thought it would be right." I'll say I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In his world, saying "I'll tell you" is almost like saying "in mine, not yet," but I decided to go. We went to bed late. He hugged me, and for the first time in a long time, not as a skill, but as a movement that comes from somewhere in the middle, I lay and listened to his heartbeat differently. Or so I just wanted to think. Sunday smelled of fresh bread and new snow. I spent a long time choosing a sweater, not for his mother, but for myself, for my feeling of "I can." He nervously adjusted the collar of his shirt. On the way to the cafe, we hardly talked, not because there was nothing to talk about, but because there was too much. "I'll tell you," he said when we reached the door. "Just, if I stumble, don't be angry." "I'm not angry at the stuttering," I answered. "I'm angry at the silence." We entered. It was light inside. My father rose to hug us. My mother smiled reservedly. I noticed how he took a deep breath, like before a dive. He turned to me, then to them, back to me. His hand found mine under the table. Unexpectedly, confidently squeezed. "Mom, Dad," he said, looking straight ahead. "This is Anya Moya." He smiled, and in the smile for a moment flashed that simple clarity that I was looking for. At that moment, the door of the cafe swung open, the bell rang, and Igor entered the room, with that same light, inappropriate cheerfulness in important places. He saw us, waved, and without waiting for an invitation, approached our table. "Oh, you're here," he said too loudly. "Well, would you like to introduce me?" Or as usual, "I just have someone staying with me?" Seryoja's hand immediately tensed under the table, like a spring that had been prepared in advance. His gaze flickered. Mom carefully adjusted the napkin, Dad nodded to Igor, and I felt the skin on the back of my head break out in goosebumps. The world was again reduced to one word: how. Silence hung for a second, like a bridge that you can either walk or fall across. Seryoja opened his mouth. Igor, he said too evenly, this is not as usual. This is my. He broke off the sentence and turned to me as if asking permission to continue living. Igor, he said, not so evenly. This is not as usual. This is my girl, my man, and if it's easier for someone to laugh than to choose words, you can laugh in another place. He held my hand under the table and didn't remove it. Confusion flashed across Igor's face, then the usual bravado collapsed. So, he drawled and stepped back, brushing his shoulder against the closet door. I understand, I'm glad for you. And he dissolved into the hum of voices. Seryoja turned to his parents. Mom, Dad, this is Anya, my girlfriend. We are together, and it is important to me that you know this not by default, but out loud. Mom nodded slightly and Dad's gaze softened. He stood up and shook my hand. Nice to meet you, Anya, he said warmly without asking unnecessary questions. Mom straightened the napkin and asked if I liked things too sweet. Her concern was as quiet as the rustling of paper. I sat and felt something heavy inside me finally fall into place. The words spoken out loud rang in the air, like the clear ringing of a glass. Not the kind that breaks into your ears, but the kind that makes water taste better. I leaned back in my chair and straightened my shoulders for the first time in a long time. Warm light fell on the table, on his fingers on my hand. The world didn't immediately become perfect, but it gained in sharpness. After lunch, we walked home through the snow crumbs on the asphalt. He was silent, but the silence was not from emptiness, from processing. He stopped at the entrance. I understand, he said quietly. For you, it was important. For me, too. He hesitated. I am proud that you are next to me. I nodded, and in her own thank you, I heard not gratitude for the water supply, but recognition. I noticed it. Then it was routine. Work, trams, evenings, his list of joint activities. Each of his attempts looked like a consolidation of the material. Stickers on the refrigerator, dinner. Reminders on the phone, ask how she is. Printed recipes with notes, less salt. Sometimes, overcoming himself, he sent voice messages. Anya, I'm going home. I saw a dog on the bridge today. It was funny, like a schoolboy's bangs. It was jerky, but lively. At the same time, he went to a psychologist. He returned from there as a person who is learning to hear his own echo. He sat on the edge of the sofa and said, as a child, I was not taught to say, I love you. We had hammered nails responsible for that. I am not making excuses. I am learning. And it was clear that this was not just a report, but his personal attempt to learn a word that cannot be translated into the language of sockets. I made mental check marks, not like in a register, but like in a growth diary. Said out loud in front of friends, said in front of parents, remembered about Wednesday, touched just like that. But along with the check marks, old reflexes still came up. Automatically, it's more convenient for you to come here instead of, I want to see you. A sober, let's plan a vacation instead of, where do you want to go? And every time the old slipped through, I caught myself getting irritated. At him, at myself, at our eternal agreement, no quarrels. Sometimes we were silent for 2 days, not out of resentment, but out of fatigue from trying to speak correctly. One evening, I brought that very term into the conversation, not like a whip, but like a shore. I signed the lease for the studio. I said calmly, in 3 weeks, I'm picking up the keys. We can try to build us, living separately. Not because I'm leaving, because I need a house that's not stay, but come. If this destroys us, it means that it wasn't a feeling that held us back, but a habit. I was afraid he would hear a threat in this. He was silent for a long time, then nodded, slowly, as if trying on the idea. I'll help you move your things, he said evenly, and, let's try, I want, not in words on the list, but for real. He really did help. He carried boxes, swore at the old elevator, which stopped halfway up, accidentally scratched his elbow on the iron door, and laughing, joked that blood is also a confession. We both laughed not cunningly, but honestly. He put apples bought on the way on the windowsill, so that it smells the way you like. I heard in this movement not a schedule, but a gesture. I remembered your smell. On the evening of the last move, we were sitting on the floor of my studio on empty boxes, eating pizza from paper plates. The light bulb under the ceiling was bare, like a truthful word. I looked at my window into the courtyard, without an aluminum frame, and thought that the needle of my internal compass had turned not toward him or away from him, but toward itself. He, holding a mug, talked about work, about how the office printer annoyed him. Then suddenly seriously, today I caught myself wanting to tell a colleague, I'm comfortable, but said I want to, and it sounded scary, as if I climbed onto a stool without support. Scary is alive, I answered. The dead are not scared. We agreed. Dates on Sundays, dinner on Wednesdays, but not as activities, but as points of contact. If it doesn't work out, we postpone it, but we say it in words, not by disappearing. He quickly learned to write, I want to see you, without replacing want with can. But next to this, there remained the usual voids into which my expectations fell, like keys into the gap between the elevator and the shaft. And yet we held out a week, a second, a third. I came to life. The smell of morning coffee was now for me. I chose curtains, and no one checked how far from the edge the curtain rod hung. On Saturday, I bought a small rug at the entrance, warm, shaggy. On it, my shoes looked at home. I invited Dasha to my place. Sometimes we were silent together, and it was a friendly silence, not cement. On the fourth week, Seryoja and I went to a museum of modern art. There was an installation in one room, an empty room, a folding chair in the corner, and on the wall the inscription, Waiting is also an action. We stood and laughed in whispers because I immediately remembered my folding chair in his apartment. No more folding ones, I said, only normal ones. I agree, he answered, and this time his word did not sound like approved for execution. It was soft, human. We walked home along the embankment. The wind smelled of wet rust from the railings. He stopped, took my hand, and suddenly said, I love you, without otherwise, without on schedule. My heart hit my throat. I inhaled, as for the first time after a long dive, I love you too. I answered. We stood there, and it felt like we were taken off the old nail and hung on a new one that wouldn't fall off at the first draft. I counted to 10 in my head to hold the moment, like a butterfly in the palms of my hands. And then another 2 weeks passed, and life as it can began to return to routine. He did not break down, did not retreat dramatically. He simply said, conveniently from time to time again, where I heard want, and translated us into terms of logistics. Once or twice I noticed that his I love you appeared in response to mine, not as a movement, but as a reflection. I wrote down these little things in a notebook, and the notebook began to look like a map of sea currents, where it is warm, where it is cold, where it is calm. I understood more and more clearly. He is really trying, he is really learning. But his native language is don't interfere, do it right, be close. And even having learned the words, I choose you, he sometimes pronounces them like a foreign tongue twister that does not become native. On the last day of our conditional month, I called him to me. I put a teapot, a vase of apples, our old keychain from the A+C fair on the table. We sat down. I took his hand, like you take a person's hand before jumping into water. I see that you've done a lot, I said, and these aren't just check marks. This is hard learning. I'm grateful. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like myself. He looked straight at me. So it worked out? Asked quietly, like a student to a teacher. Partially. I smiled, and the smile was not bitter but bright. And then, honestly, I can't go back to live with you. Not because I'm offended, because I finally have a home where I not stayed, but live. And I don't want to be a project for you anymore. I want to be a choice. If one day for you this becomes not an effort, but a breath, we will find each other again, even if along the way we become someone else. And now, I put the keychain on the table. Let's honestly let go. He was silent for a long time. One could call it cowardice, but I learned to recognize work in his silence. He ran his finger over the letters a plus C, as if erasing invisible dust, then looked up and said, I don't want to lose you. But I love you not as I can correctly, but as I can. And I understand that this is not enough if for you love is also a word and not just a graph. I let go. He smiled crookedly. And thank you for teaching me to speak. We hugged, calmly, without the promise of forever. He put the key on my shelf at the entrance, carefully parallel to the edge, as he knows how I walked him to the door, and when it closed in my apartment, I could hear the kettle reaching a boil, a clear, high sound like the note A being tuned. I took the keychain, a plus C, put it not in the trash, but in a box. Let it be a memory of how I learned to speak myself. Time passed. The contract turned into a permanent one. A nameplate appeared on my door, not a number. I bought curtains with a small green pattern. So that I can have spring even in December, I told the saleswoman, and she laughed. I became friends with the neighbor upstairs, a woman who watered the geraniums and baked cinnamon snails on the landing for the whole house. On Sundays, I went to my parents, and my dad always prepared a joke for me, like your compass, and we both understood that the arrow does not break. Now sometimes, Seryoja and I would text each other. A few short, how are you? Did you see a funny dog on the bridge? Do you have success with everything? Once he sent me. I renovated the hallway, hung a shelf for keys, I labeled 2 cells. One is empty. I'll leave it empty until I figure out what I want to put in it. I replied, empty space is also a choice. It lets you breathe. In the spring, the apple tree under my window blossomed. Suddenly and generously, I opened the window and a smell entered the room. Not arguing with anything, not explaining itself, simply living. I put 2 mugs on the windowsill, my white one with a crack and a new simple one in case someone ever came. Not to stay, but to be. I poured myself some coffee, and for the first time in a long time, drank it slowly, without rushing anywhere. And I understood a simple thing that my notebook seemed to be shouting about so loudly. Sometimes love for another begins with the fact that you stop living as your own neighbor. You choose yourself, out loud. And then every we that will happen one day has a chance to be a home and not a folding chair against the wall. I closed the window. The light fell on my books, on the curtains with a green pattern, on the rug by the door. The phone vibrated, from Dasha. Let's go to the embankment in the evening? Me, I want to. And in this I want, there was no logistics, only life point but not doors. Windows. Further, there will be more air, more apple trees, more I want. And if someone one day asks me, AET for leaving a dormitory relationship? Zrenya, I will smile and say, no, I just stopped being a random guest in my own life.